The sun had barely crested the distant hills, casting long golden fingers of light across the vast expanse of the Serengeti. Acacia trees stood like ancient sentinels scattered across the endless plains, their gnarled branches silhouetted against the brightening sky. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of dew-covered grass and the distant calls of awakening wildlife. David adjusted the strap of his warm canvas backpack and glanced over at Joseph, who was already checking the GPS device strapped to his wrist. The two rangers had worked together for nearly a decade, partners not only in their daily patrols but in a deeper mission to protect the fragile balance of life in one of the world's most iconic ecosystems. Joseph was the quieter of the two, tall and lean with eyes that always seemed to be scanning the horizon. David, stockier and quick to smile, balanced his friend's seriousness with an easy confidence. Yet beneath their differences, they shared the same unshakable love for nature, a bond forged in childhood spent wandering the wild edges of their villages, fascinated by every footprint and rustling leaf. Their patrols followed no strict script. Sometimes they would spend hours tracking a pride of lions to ensure the cats hadn't strayed too close to a settlement. Other days were more mundane, checking camera traps, logging weather data, or removing snares left by poachers. But every morning brought the same ritual, a silent moment of respect as they set foot onto the land. A prayer to the ancestors and to the spirits of the animals they sought to protect. This morning began no differently. They had walked for just under an hour when the first sign of trouble came, not through sight or smell, but sound. A high-pitched cry ripped through the air, sharp and sudden, cutting through the usual symphony of chirps and rustles. It wasn't the call of any animal either man recognized. It was something else, human, desperate. David and Joseph froze. In the stillness that followed, even the birds seemed to fall silent. "Did you hear that?" David whispered. Joseph was already nodding, turning toward the direction the sound had come from. Without another word, they broke into a run, boots crunching dry grass and leaves as they dodged low branches and anthills. Adrenaline surged through their veins, not from fear, but from instinct, the ranger's reflex to respond. The cry came again. Closer now. This time, there was no mistaking it. A scream of pain, then a muffled shout, as if someone was being silenced. Their pace quickened, as they rounded a small rise. The source of the sound came into view, a narrow clearing where the grass had been trampled flat. In the middle of it, a young woman knelt beside a large canvas sack, sobbing, her hands tied behind her back. Beside her stood two men with rifles slung over their shoulders, arguing in low, tense voices. Poachers. David pulled Joseph behind the cover of a thorn bush. The two exchanged a quick glance, understanding passing between them without the need for words. There were only two of the intruders, but they were armed and dangerous. Rangers were trained for situations like this. But it never got easier. Joseph pulled out the small radio clipped to his vest and whispered into it. "We've got poachers. East clearing. 2 armed. Civilian present. Request backup." Static crackled. Then a response. Acknowledged. ETA 15 minutes. They didn't have 15 minutes. David scanned the area. The poachers hadn't seen him yet. We can't wait, he whispered. She might not have that long. Joseph hesitated only a second before nodding. They crept forward, staying low, circling around to flank the men. David counted silently in his head, 1, 2, 3. They burst from the underbrush as one, shouting in Swahili, "Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" The reaction was instant and chaotic. One of the poachers spun and raised his rifle. Joseph fired first. A warning shot that struck the ground inches from the man's feet. The rifle clattered to the earth as he stumbled backward, hands in the air. The second man tried to run, but David tackled him to the ground in a swirl of dust and limbs. It was over in seconds. The woman was still crying, but now out of relief. Joseph cut her bindings with his knife, speaking to her gently in a soothing tone. She explained in broken English that she was a wildlife researcher from Arusha, captured the day before while monitoring elephant movements near the park's southern boundary. "They thought I had tracking data," she said shakily. "I told them I didn't, but they wouldn't believe me." David felt a cold rage twist in his chest. Poachers had become more sophisticated over the years, targeting researchers and rangers to get access to protected zones and GPS intel. These weren't desperate men feeding families. They were part of an organized network, funded and ruthless. Within minutes, backup arrived. 2 more rangers and a truck to transport the prisoners and the rescued woman. David and Joseph gave their report, then watched as the poachers were cuffed and led away. The woman offered him a tearful thank you, her hands trembling as she accepted a bottle of water and a satellite phone to call her team. Only after the truck disappeared over the hill did the 2 rangers allow themselves to breathe fully again. They stood in silence for a moment, listening once more to the sounds of the Serengeti, the chirp of cicadas, the grunt of a distant wildebeest, the whisper of wind through dry grass. The world had returned to its rhythm, as if nothing had happened. But David and Joseph knew better. "This isn't random," Joseph said quietly. They knew where to look. David nodded grimly. "And if they're this close to the heart of the park, something bigger is coming." The patrol, it seemed, had only just begun. Their journey back toward base camp was slow and thoughtful. What had started as a routine morning had turned into something far more dangerous. They had seen the signs before, poaching groups testing the park's defenses, probing for weaknesses. Each time, the rangers responded. Each time, they risked everything. But that was their calling. As the sun climbed higher and the savannah came alive in a burst of golden heat, David and Joseph walked on, their silhouettes stretching long across the grass. The weight of the morning hung heavy on their shoulders. But so did the pride of knowing they had made a difference. They didn't speak much on the walk back. They didn't need to. Nature had always spoken loudly enough for both of them. The sun was now fully overhead, casting sharp shadows across the Serengeti and heating the air to a stifling dry shimmer. The patrol had resumed in silence after the earlier rescue, But the weight of the encounter still lingered heavily in both David and Joseph's minds. Every sound, every rustle in the tall grass, every bird that took flight caused their muscles to tense. The poacher's brazenness had reminded them just how thin the line was between safety and chaos in this wild land. They had veered off the usual patrol path, instinct guiding them more than GPS or map. It wasn't unusual. Both men often trusted their gut when navigating these familiar plains. And it was this same instinct that brought him to the grove. A cluster of acacia trees stood ahead, their sparse foliage offering a rare patch of shade. Birds fluttered nervously among the branches, chirping loud and erratic. Something had disturbed them. Joseph was the first to raise a hand, signaling for silence. He tilted his head, listening intently. There was a strange rhythm in the tree above, a dry, scraping sound, like scales brushing against bark. Then came a sharp, choked cry, barely audible, almost like a gasp. They both looked up. There, draped across a thick, slanted branch like a monstrous vine, was a massive African rock python, its powerful body coiled tightly around something, a shape that twisted and thrashed weakly in its grasp. A lion cub. Its golden fur was darkened with dirt and blood, its eyes wide with terror, one paw hanging limply over the edge of the branch. The snake's immense body had nearly enveloped the small creature, crushing it slowly in a deadly embrace. Each breath the cub tried to take seemed to be more labored than the last. David exhaled sharply, stunned. That's not possible. Lions don't climb that high. How the hell did it even get up there? Maybe it followed something, or got chased. Doesn't matter now, Joseph said, his voice low but urgent. It's dying. David stared at the scene for a moment, his mind racing. They had no tranquilizers, no poles, no proper climbing gear. Just the essentials: knives, binoculars, a coil of rope, and their own bare hands. The python was huge, probably over 4 meters long. Disturbing it too suddenly could provoke it to tighten its grip, or strike. He bit his lip, struggling. We're not equipped for this. One wrong move, and Joseph turned to him sharply. His face was lined with dust and sweat, but his eyes were fierce. It's just a baby. You think that snake cares if it lives or dies? If we don't help, who will? David looked up again. The cub let out a faint, pitiful sound, more whimper than roar, and his chest tightened. He nodded slowly. All right, but we have to be smart. They took stock of their meager tools. Joseph pulled out the rope and began knotting it quickly, forming a makeshift harness. David removed his boots and began climbing, carefully choosing each foothold along the gnarled trunk. The bark was rough, scraping his palms, but the adrenaline drowned out the pain. Higher and higher he climbed, until the branch began to narrow and sway slightly under his weight. The python was coiled around the cub about 5 meters above the ground. It had sensed David's presence and had stopped squeezing. Its triangular head lifted slightly, tongue flicking, eyes fixed on the intruder. David whispered back down, "I'll distract it. When it moves, I need you to swing the rope around its body and pull hard." Try to uncoil it. Even just a little. Joseph gave a tight nod and positioned himself below. Rope in hand like a lasso. David inched closer. He could now see the cub's eyes fluttering. Its movements almost non-existent. Time was running out. He reached slowly into his vest and pulled out his knife, holding it flat in one hand while trying not to startle the python. "Come on, you ugly bastard," he muttered under his breath. With a sudden movement, he struck the branch near the python's head with the back of the knife, making a sharp metallic clang. The snake reacted instantly. Its head jerked toward him, mouth opening slightly to reveal hooked fangs. That was the moment Joseph had been waiting for. He threw the rope high, and it looped cleanly over the thickest part of the snake's coils. He pulled hard. The python hissed in fury, momentarily distracted, and loosened its grip just enough for David to act. With a burst of energy, David lunged forward and slipped his free arm under the cub's body, prying at the coils with all his strength. The python struck, missing by inches, as Joseph hauled on the rope below. The snake's body twisted, writhing in resistance, but the combined force of the two men began to work. In one powerful tug, David yanked the cub free. The little lion collapsed against him, limp but still breathing. David barely had time to shield the cub before the python lunged again, this time not at him, but trying to reassert its grip on the lost prey. He lost his footing and slipped. For a terrifying second, both man and cub fell. Joseph rushed forward and caught the cub as it dropped through the branches, cushioning its fall with his own body. David landed hard nearby, grunting in pain as he rolled across the grass. The python, furious and denied its meal, slowly began to retreat back into the higher branches, coiling itself in defeat among the leaves. David sat up, groaning, and crawled over. "Is it?" Joseph was cradling the cub in his arms. "It's breathing, weak, but alive." David let out a long breath, part relief, part exhaustion. He glanced up at the branch again, then back at Joseph, shaking his head. "We should be dead. But we're not," Joseph said. "And neither is it." They fashioned a stretcher from 2 sticks and David's jacket, then began the long walk back to base camp, taking turns carrying the injured cub. It was a slow and grueling journey. Every few minutes, one of them would stop to check the cub's pulse, to make sure the tiny heart still beat beneath the battered ribs. Hours passed. The sun began to dip low again, painting the sky in hues of fire and amber. And still, they walked. Back at camp, the veterinary team rushed out to meet them. The cub was whisked away, and the rangers collapsed beneath a canvas awning, gulping down water and exchanging only the occasional glance of disbelief. Later, after nightfall, the head vet approached. Her face was lined with worry, but she smiled faintly. "He'll make it," she said. "You got him out just in time." Another minute, and she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. David leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Every muscle in his body ached. He could still feel the python's hiss, the heat of the branch, the dying weight of the cub in his arms. Joseph sat beside him, gazing into the dark. Sometimes, he said quietly. "I wonder if it's worth it. Risking everything like this." David turned his head. "You mean today?" Joseph shook his head. "No, I mean every day." David was silent for a long moment. Then said, "If that cub lives, grows up, maybe becomes a leader of its pride one day, then yeah. I think it's worth it." And in the distance, somewhere beyond the trees, the faint roar of a lion echoed through the Serengeti night. The sun was inching toward the horizon, casting long orange streaks over the Serengeti as the light began to soften and cool. But for David and Joseph, the pressure was only rising. Time was slipping through their fingers like dry sand. And high above them, the battle between life and death was unfolding on a narrow branch. The lion cub was now barely moving, its breaths shallow and infrequent. The massive African rock python had sensed their presence and had started tightening its coils again, responding to danger with instinctive lethality. Its muscles moved like cables of steel beneath its mottled scales, each squeeze threatening to crush the cub's fragile ribs. David's boots dug into the dusty soil as he braced himself at the base of the tree, gripping a sturdy, sun-bleached branch. "I'm going up," he said, breath already shallow with anticipation. Joseph nodded, steadying the tree's base with both hands. "I'll stay below. Just be careful, and fast." David climbed quickly, his fingers finding familiar grooves in the bark, the coarse texture scraping at his palms. The cub's faint cries echoed above, more instinct than strength, like it wanted to fight but didn't know how. The branch that held the python was not far, but the climb demanded balance and precision. One wrong move, and he could fall, or worse, startle the snake into finishing what it had begun. As he neared the branch, David paused, anchoring his foot between a fork in the wood. The python was fully coiled now, wrapped around the cub in a grotesque embrace. Its body looped 2-3 times. The lion's hind legs dangled off the branch, limp, its claws twitching weakly. The snake's head had lifted, tongue flicking the air in slow, lazy movements, testing, watching. David could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy like the calm before a lightning strike. "Joseph," he called quietly down, "get ready. I don't know how this will go." "I've got it," Joseph replied, arms outstretched beneath the tree. His eyes never left the cub. David scanned the area around the branch and spotted a thick, sturdy offshoot nearby, one that had broken but remained attached to the tree. He reached for it, tugged, and it snapped free. It was just the right length and solid enough to serve as a makeshift tool. Holding his breath, he reached out with the branch and gently, almost tenderly, tapped the python near the midsection. Once, twice. The snake flinched. Its head swiveled slowly in David's direction, sensing danger. For a terrifying moment, it didn't loosen its grip, it tightened. The lion cub let out a small, pitiful gasp as the pressure mounted. "No, no, no," David whispered. He tapped again, this time a little harder. Then again. Not to strike, but to disturb the python's rhythm. Confuse it, force it to shift its body weight. Finally, the snake recoiled slightly, curling back on itself. adjusting its coils, and for the briefest of moments, its grip on the cub loosened. "Now!" David shouted. Joseph was already moving. He stepped in beneath the tree just as the cub's body slipped from the coils. For a half-second, it seemed suspended in air, ears back, tail trailing, and then it dropped. Joseph caught it cleanly against his chest. He staggered slightly under the unexpected weight but didn't fall. The cub was warm, barely responsive, its heart fluttering like the wings of a bird trapped in a cage. "Got you," he murmured. Above, the python sensed its prey was gone. Its body whipped across the branch, agitated, tail lashing against the bark. For a moment, David feared it would strike at him, but the snake turned. Retreating, its thick body sliding along the branch and back into the higher canopy. A rustle of leaves, the sound of scales over bark, and then it was gone, disappearing into the forest beyond the tree line. David exhaled and climbed down carefully, every limb trembling with exertion and adrenaline. When he reached the ground, Joseph was kneeling with the cub cradled in his arms. It was alive, barely. Its chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow bursts, its eyes blinking slowly as if it was too tired to keep them open. One ear was torn, and bruises marked its side where the python's coils had tightened. But it was breathing. "That was close," Joseph said, his voice tight. David nodded, wiping sweat and dirt from his face. "Too close." They laid the cub gently in a shaded patch of grass, and Joseph poured a few drops of water from his canteen into its mouth. The lion blinked again, then let out a faint, wheezing whimper. Its eyes, soft amber in the dying sunlight, locked with theirs for a moment. And David felt something shift in his chest. A spark, a reminder. This is why they were here. This was what it meant to protect. They didn't speak much as they fashioned a sling from their gear, using Joseph's shirt as a cushion and David's rope to tie the makeshift stretcher. Carefully, they carried the cub between them, step by careful step through the savannah as dusk began to settle. The air cooled, crickets chirped. A lone giraffe watched them from a distance, blinking slowly, as if in approval. As the horizon turned from orange to indigo, the lights of the ranger station appeared in the distance, small, golden halos in the growing dark. The vet team met him again at the entrance, rushing the cub inside for emergency care. David and Joseph stood silently in the doorway, watching the flurry of movement, gauze, IV fluids, steady hands. "He'll need rest," the vet said after examining the cub. "But he's young, strong. He'll survive." Relief washed over them like a wave. David sat on the steps outside, staring up at the stars. His body sore and aching, but his spirits strangely full. Joseph sat beside him, pulling his knees to his chest. "That was insane." "Yeah," David said, chuckling softly. "We climbed a tree to save a lion cub from a python." "I don't think that's in the handbook." Joseph smiled. "We should rewrite the handbook." They sat there in companionable silence, the Serengeti stretching out around them in the hush of twilight. Somewhere far away, a lion's roar echoed through the plains, soft, powerful, Ancient. It could have been the cub's mother. It could have been the pride calling him home. David looked over at Joseph. "We did good today." Joseph nodded. "Yeah, we did." And in that moment, beneath a sky full of stars, in a land both beautiful and brutal, they knew they would keep doing it again. As long as they could. As long as there was something wild left to protect. The days that followed the rescue passed with a quiet intensity that neither David nor Joseph had quite expected. After the drama and adrenaline of that perilous afternoon, the ranger station settled into a different kind of rhythm, one of careful watching, gentle tending, and hope. The lion cub had been touch and go the first night. His breathing was shallow, his body limp from shock, bruising, and exhaustion. The veterinary team monitored him in shifts, keeping his small form wrapped in blankets, giving fluids drop by drop, coaxing him back into life with whispered words and cautious touch. David and Joseph didn't leave his side. They made a corner for themselves in the modest infirmary, sleeping in turns on canvas mats, taking notes on the cub's progress, asking questions, fetching supplies. They insisted on being part of the care, not because they didn't trust the professionals, but because they had to. Something about the cub had taken hold of their hearts, like a tiny fire they needed to keep alive with every breath. 3 days after the rescue, the cub finally stood on shaky legs. It was Joseph who witnessed it first. He had just returned from refilling the water basin when he glanced into the enclosure and saw the cub, wobbly but upright, blinking at him with wide, curious eyes. He froze, then called softly, "David, come quick." David rushed in, and together they watched as the cub took a tentative step forward, his claws scraping lightly on the tile floor. His tail flicked, his ears perked, and he gave a tiny, breathy mewl, more question than sound. "He's trying," Joseph whispered, almost in awe. "He's a fighter," David said, then added, after a moment, "He needs a name." They both fell silent. Naming a wild animal wasn't something they took lightly. It wasn't about ownership or sentiment, it was about respect, connection, the acknowledgement that this creature, this life, mattered. Joseph was the one who said it. "Tumwini." David looked at him, brows raised. "It means hope in Swahili." Joseph explained. "That's what he is now. Isn't he? Not just for us. For everyone." David nodded slowly, the name settling into place like a stone finding its home in the riverbed. "Tumaini," he repeated. "Yeah, that's exactly right." From that day on, Tumaini became a fixture at the station. He was never caged, only watched and protected. As his strength returned, his curiosity blossomed. He followed David and Joseph around the yard like a shadow, batting at their boots, pouncing on fallen leaves, climbing everything he could reach. He gnawed on their radio wires, slept under their chairs, and tried to sneak bites from their meals when no one was looking. At first, the vet had warned against too much contact. "He's wild," she reminded them. "He's not a pet." They agreed. Of course. But even she softened when she saw the way Tumaini would press his forehead gently into Joseph's knee when tired. or the way he would light up when David whistled. This wasn't taming, it was trust. Every day, the cub grew stronger, his limp faded, his muscles filled out, his playful nature emerged like light after a storm. And with every pounce and tumble, he stitched himself deeper into the hearts of the two men who had saved him. The story, as stories do, began to spread. First it was the local rangers, who shared it in quiet voices over evening fires. Then it reached nearby villages, passed from mother to daughter, farmer to teacher. Soon, people from all over Tanzania were talking about the little lion called Hope. The cub who had been pulled from death and raised by the men who walked with lions. A journalist from Arusha came to visit. Then a wildlife blogger from Nairobi. Photos were taken. Joseph kneeling beside Tumaini as he played with a carved wooden toy. David laughing as the cub leapt unexpectedly into his lap. The images struck a chord. They went viral. Suddenly, David and Joseph found themselves at the center of something much bigger than themselves. People began writing letters, children drawing pictures of Tumaini, students asking how they could help protect lions, elders offering blessings and prayers. Donations came into the station, enough to buy better medical supplies, rebuild part of the enclosure, even expand their tracking equipment. But more than material support, what spread was something deeper, a shift in perception, a growing belief that the wilderness was not something distant, savage, or separate, but something to be cherished, protected, loved, that humans and animals weren't meant to be enemies or strangers, but companions sharing the same home. One afternoon, as Tumaini napped beneath the shade of a broad fig tree, David and Joseph sat nearby, sipping tea from metal mugs. They watched the cub's sides rise and fall, his paws twitching as he dreamed. "You ever think we'd end up here?" David asked, voice soft. Joseph smiled. "You mean famous lion babysitters?" David laughed. "No, I mean, part of something like this. Something that people care about. Something that might actually change things." Joseph nodded slowly. "I always believed we could do something good. But I never imagined it would look like this." They fell into silence, the kind that only comes from deep companionship and shared purpose. Later that week, a local school visited the station. A group of 20 children, bright-eyed and buzzing with excitement, were led through the grounds by the rangers. When they saw Tumaini, by now sleek and golden, still young but visibly powerful, they gasped in awe. "Is that him?" one girl whispered. "The lion from the story." David knelt beside her and smiled. "That's him. But the real story is what comes next." "What happens next?" she asked, eyes wide. David glanced at Joseph, then back at the children. "What happens next," he said, "is that we make sure there are more Tumainis. That we protect this land. That you grow up knowing it's your job too, not just ours. Nature needs guardians. Maybe some of you will be the next ones." The children nodded solemnly. They understood, in the way children often do. Tumaini stretched then, letting out a soft roar, a sound still young, still growing, but strong, proud. And so the cub who had once been wrapped in death, barely breathing in a tree, became something greater than even his rescuers had imagined. He became a symbol, a teacher, a bridge between worlds. David and Joseph knew that one day, Hermione would return to the wild. He would lead his own pride, roam the plains they had walked together. He would forget their faces. Perhaps, but they would never forget his. Because in saving him, they had rediscovered their purpose. And in watching him live, they had remembered what hope truly looked like. Golden, fearless, and running through the tall grass at sunset. The months passed as gently as the turning of the seasons. And Hermione, once a fragile bundle of fur and breathless struggle, had become a lion in every sense of the word. His body had filled out with lean muscle. His gait was confident and proud. And the soft cub-like mules had given way to the beginnings of a young lion's roar. Though still juvenile, he had reached the age and strength where instincts began to take over. He became restless, curious. His amber eyes wandered beyond the fence line, beyond the station, to the plains that stretched endlessly beyond. David and Joseph noticed the change first in his behavior. He played less and prowled more. He stalked shadows. He began marking trees, sharpening his claws not just out of habit, but with intention. He no longer followed their every step. Instead, he sat watching birds from afar or gazed into the wind, ears twitching at calls only he could truly understand. It was time. The decision to release Hermione back into the wild was not made lightly. Though both rangers had always known this day would come, the veterinary team gave their approval, and the wildlife department mapped out a safe region within the Serengeti, a protected area near a small, established pride that had recently lost a young male. It was the perfect place for Hermione to begin the next chapter of his life. The day of departure arrived with a quiet, golden sunrise. The sky stretched in soft pastel hues over the plains as the team prepared a specially designed transport crate. Lined with grass and open enough to allow air and light, but secure for the journey. Hermione, ever observant, seemed to understand something was different. He didn't resist when the rangers approached. He didn't growl or hide. Instead, he walked toward them and sat calmly, blinking up at David and Joseph as they knelt beside him one last time. David reached out and stroked his back, running his hand through the familiar coarse fur. "You remember what we told you," he said softly, "out there. You're on your own now. No easy food, no cozy shelter. But you've got everything you need. You're ready." Joseph placed his hand over Hermione's heart. "And you've got that. The biggest heart in the bush." Hermione nuzzled against them both briefly, one final gesture of connection, and then, without fuss, entered the crate. The drive out to the release site was long and quiet. No music, no chatter. Just the hum of the tires over dirt, the whistle of wind through cracked windows, and the occasional bird soaring overhead. David and Joseph rode in the back with Hermione, watching him through the slats. He lay still, calm, but alert. When they reached the location, an open glade bordered by tall grass and acacia trees, the truck came to a halt. The sun was nearly overhead, casting warm light across the land. Nearby, fresh tracks showed the presence of lions, likely the pride the team had monitored for weeks. The conditions were ideal. The Rangers stepped out first. David inhaled deeply, the scent of the wild sharp and grounding. Joseph circled the back of the truck and unlocked the crate gate. For a moment, Hermione didn't move. He simply looked at them. First David, then Joseph, then back at the open world beyond. Then, slowly, gracefully, he stepped out. He moved with purpose now. Low to the ground, body taut with energy, he sniffed the air, looked around, and then turned back one final time. His eyes met David's, and for a fleeting second, it felt like something passed between him. Not words, but understanding, a farewell, a thank you, a promise. And then he was gone. He didn't run, not at first. He walked into the grass. Head high, tail swaying. Only when he reached the edge of the field did he break into a jog, then a sprint. Golden muscles rippling under his coat as he disappeared toward the distant rise, where the land opened into the heart of lion territory. David stood still, breath caught in his chest. Joseph folded his arms and whispered, "He'll be all right. I know," David replied. Still, they didn't move for a long time. That night, back at the ranger station, the silence was heavier than usual. No soft paws on the concrete. No flick of a curious tail under the table. The little companion who had curled beside them for months, who had chewed their boots, startled birds, and purred in sleep, was now part of the wild again. But neither man felt grief. What they felt, instead, was pride and peace. News of Hermione's release spread almost as fast as his rescue had. The story reached national news, conservation groups, even classrooms across East Africa and beyond. People wrote in again, this time with joy and wonder, thanking David and Joseph not just for saving a lion, but for reminding the world of something that often gets lost in headlines and statistics. That nature is not a problem to be solved, but a gift to be cherished. That wildlife is not just something to protect, but something to love. In Hermione's story, people saw something they needed: hope. A small cub, trapped and helpless, given a second chance, not through technology or bureaucracy, but through courage, compassion, and connection. David and Joseph returned to their daily patrols with a quiet resolve. The landscape looked the same, but everything felt different. Every footprint in the dust, every rustle in the trees, every shadow under the sun held a little more weight now. And when they passed the grove where they had once heard that fateful cry, they paused, just for a moment. They looked up at the branch, now bare, and smiled. "Think he remembers us?" Joseph asked one day. David shrugged. "Maybe not with his mind, but with his heart, I think so." "Do you miss him?" David didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I miss the sound of him. But no, I don't miss having him. Because he's where he belongs." Joseph nodded. And so are we. They knew their work was far from over. Poachers still roamed. Droughts still loomed. Habitat loss and human-animal conflict were daily battles. But Hermione had shown him, and the world, that even a small act of courage could ripple outward, changing lives. Shifting tides. One lion, two rangers, 1,000 hearts inspired. As the sun dipped low once more over the golden grasslands, David and Joseph walked side by side into the gathering dusk, back into the wild. Back into their duty. Back into the quiet heroism of everyday guardianship. Because they knew, sometimes, saving a single life wasn't just saving one creature. Sometimes, it was saving a world.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.